Well, that's very, very kind of you. But most people have asked me not to sing. So the rock star thing, we're probably not going to sing. So let's start with this. You're investors. You're looking at venture capital. Why would you invest in some sort of a startup or a venture fund where you know it might not work out? Might be 10 years, 20 years, 15 years, 5 years. It'll take a long time. Your money will be locked up. Why would you ever get involved in something like that? Now I'm going to kind of go back and give you a little bit of a flavor for my history. Right about when I was born, actually a little bit before I was born, my grandfather was the first Silicon Valley venture capitalist. And he started a fund, and it kind of did some things. They actually, just before that, he helped fund the Bay Bridge, which is a huge bridge that goes from Oakland to San Francisco. And then he did a few technology companies, and then he got out of the business. And my dad was a great pioneer in venture capital, and he started with about 6 other people who used to work for my grandfather. And they all went off and started venture funds, and they started to work together and build things. And I watched as the Silicon Valley, where I grew up, it started out as a bunch of prune yards and apricot groves and rolling hills, and now it's this economic engine of the world. And it happened because of venture capital. It happened because people had faith and hope. And what happens is, if people are willing to risk their money, other people will live up to, and they trust someone with their money, other people will live up to that trust, no matter who they are. If I hand you money and I say, I trust you, you are going to do great things with this, you're going to do the best you can, you're going to build your business, and then we're going to split the business in some way. That trust, you will live up to that. You'll make sure that you have that. And that's true of all humans everywhere. I've had almost no one who has taken the money and not done with it what they had planned to do and done well with it. So it turns out that my dad did this for a while, and he had amazing returns. It took a while, but his returns were extraordinary, way higher than any other financial vehicle that was ever out there. And then the government sort of caught wind of this. The investment bankers kind of caught wind of it, and suddenly the government made it okay for pension funds and insurance companies and other foundations to invest in venture capital. And by doing that, they opened up the field, and suddenly people could go raise money, they could put it to work, and it created this incredible vehicle, this strong vehicle for financial and economic growth. And that is basically what has happened to the Silicon Valley. And I've gotten to see that a couple of other times. So anyway, I got into the venture capital business. Our government had a program where if I put up a certain amount of money, I was able to borrow 3 times as much against that amount of money and put it to work in 40 or 50 companies. And I did that. And after about 3 years, the government was coming to me and saying, "You've gone from our watch list to our dirt list. We're going to call your loan." And I had to go back and say, no, don't call the loan. This is just the beginning. Things are looking pretty good. You know, I didn't know, but I convinced them that we're looking pretty good. And then the IPO window opened. It used to kind of come open, and then people would all go public, and then it would close up for a while, and nobody would go public for a bunch of years. Anyway, the IPO window opened up, and I got 5 IPOs, and one of them was so extraordinary It paid back all the government loans. It gave us all my investors a huge amount of money. And suddenly I went from being on their dirt list to being on the wall as Venture Capitalist of the Year for the SBA program. So our business it's long-term, and over the long term, it really works. You take those risks, you trust people, it works. So I've gotten to go through a really amazing experience here as a venture capitalist, because after that fund, I went and raised another fund, and then another one where I said, wow, there's this thing, it's called the internet. And it's going to change things because it's going to connect people, and we're all going to be interconnected. And so I told my investors, hey, I really want to invest in companies around this internet thing. And we lost investors because they said, I don't want you to do any of that, similar to what they're saying about Bitcoin today. And they say, I don't want to do any of that. And I said, that's okay, you don't have to be in the fund. And I'd go and I found other investors. And then we funded a bunch of these companies, and one of them was started by these two 26-year-olds, and they came to me and they said, we got this idea for a business, and we thought it wasn't that interesting. And we were walking them out the door, and they said, well, we have this other idea. It's free web-based email. And email was just on Lotus Notes at that time, and in some government areas and some academic areas. And we said, come on back in and we'll talk about that. And then we didn't know what was going to happen with it, so we just gave them a little bit of money. And they started going, and then they said, hey, we got it working, it's up. And I looked at them, I said, okay, how are you going to market this? How are you going to tell everybody about it? And they said, oh, we want TV ads and, billboards and radio. We want all the, we want big media. And I said, you've got, you started with $100,000 or $150,000. You're now down to about $25,000. That can buy you maybe a postage stamp on a billboard on 101. You are not going to get very far on that. Then I said, well, maybe you can just get that message out to all those people on that internet thing. And they said, oh no, that would be spamming. You can't do that. And I said, we're giving it away for free. How can you get your customer to become your sales force? So I said, put a message at the bottom of everybody's screen that says, P.S. I love you. Get your free email at Hotmail. And they looked at me like, God, we talked to 25 investors before we talked to this guy. Why didn't one of them say yes? And why was it this one? And I kept pushing, and finally they said, okay, we'll do it, but no P.S. I love you. Just get your free email at Hotmail. And I said, okay, do it. But to this day, I think we would have had a much more peaceful and loving world if we had stuck with the P.S. I love you. But it did spread to 11 million users in 18 months, and the founder was Indian, and he sent one email to his friend in India, and within 3 weeks we had 300,000 Indians using Hotmail, registered users in Hotmail. And so the world just opened up. It suddenly opened up. In fact, at that time they didn't even have 100,000 computers in India, but they had 100,000 email users in India. So all of a sudden that kind of opened my eyes, and I realized that, first of all, communications is going to be everywhere and free, and we are all going to be interconnected, and this internet thing is going to spread information, entertainment. It's going to be quite an amazing thing, and so I just kept investing in that. And we really did have a big impact on education and information, a bunch of gaming. Well, that was a great career. I was able to invest in other places. I invested in all the craziest things I could find, I invested in China when it was still sort of a third world country and everybody was on bicycles, and we ended up with Baidu. I invested in Skype, which were two guys who weren't allowed in America because they were outlaws. They had started Kazaa, and I invested in Tesla, which was the craziest thing ever because that was a car company, and there hadn't been a successful car company started in the US for 50 years. And a lot had tried. And so there were some really interesting things that happened during that time. Well, now, I did a bunch of other interesting things along the way. And now something else happened. And I realized first, the world was interconnected. It was starting to feel great. We were all getting to know each other well, and businesses were very efficient, and great things were happening. And then Bitcoin happened. And suddenly you had a currency that went across country borders. And it started to, they call it decentralized. And it's also frictionless. So it's not tied to any government. And it got me thinking that all those years that we've all trained ourselves to be tribal, us against them, here's our border, we keep those people off our border, put up a wall, all those things, all of a sudden they're irrelevant. Geographic borders are falling, like they're just collapsing. We are all on one big world, and we're all interconnected, and we're all benefiting from each other. And so I saw that happening, and I went, oh my gosh, this is bigger than the internet. Because the internet affected industries that were in the $10 to $100 million range, $10 to $100 billion range. Entertainment, communications, information, they're all in that sort of range. Well, the industries that are going to be affected by this, a new currency, a new way of thinking, a new platform from which we can all communicate and build, that is incredibly powerful. That starts to affect the trillion-dollar industries, and I'll give you a few examples. First, it's obvious that a new currency will change how commerce works, and it will change how finance works, and it'll change how banking works. Now, with this technology comes with Bitcoin comes a couple of other technologies, something called blockchain, which allows for a perfect record of everything that happens through Bitcoin. And so that means that you can keep track of every transaction that happens. So people say, oh, Bitcoin's for all these, thieves and, whatever they are. Well, it turns out that they're all getting caught because Bitcoin keeps a perfect record of all the transactions. So if you're a criminal, stick to pesos. Of course, we know what happens to the peso. But the great thing about these technologies are that you can imagine, I'm in the venture capital business, so I can imagine how this could work. I could raise money in Bitcoin, and then invest the money in Bitcoin, and then have all my entrepreneurs pay their suppliers and employees in Bitcoin, and the whole thing keeps a perfect record. And if one of our companies then is sold, that whole waterfall of who gets the money and where and when, it all happens automatically. And it just flows right into everybody's Bitcoin wallet. And the various companies that we invest in don't need to hire accountants because the accounting's already done. The accountants might help them with something else, but certainly not with the bookkeeping. And then having smart contracts attached to that, there's something called a smart contract that makes it so that in software you can tell how that waterfall will go. When an event happens, where does the money go? And with those smart contracts, you can see that we could start making deals really that aren't written up by lawyers, but they're actually built into software, and we all know what will happen to that deal. It's all built in. And so that's going to change a lot of different things. Everything tied to insurance will certainly be better done with these smart contracts and these and this blockchain, and usually with Bitcoin. And that means that a lot of what government does will be affected by this. A lot of what government does is insurance. It's your healthcare insurance. It's your pension. It's Social Security. It's your, in fact, most of the money is tied to some sort of insurance, insuring the crops, insuring whatever it is. That's all going to change because that can all be built into software on the blockchain in Bitcoin, and it doesn't need to kind of flow through the hands of all the bureaucrats. And that's, I mean, this is a whole new world. And if your government is not performing, you can now move to another government. And we're much more mobile than we ever were, and we are much more interconnected than we ever were. We all kind of know what the news is. We all have sort of the same basis from which to do the work that we do. And so it's open season for governments. Governments, if they do a really good job, they could go across border. In fact, I was in Estonia. Well, the Estonian Prime Minister came to Draper University, which is a school I started in San Mateo, California. And he said, just by instituting digital signatures, you know, all the young people started to vote. Just by doing digital identity, the crime rate went down and the business climate improved. By doing digital signatures, we saved 2% of our GDP. I guess there's a lot of paper passing that goes on. And then he said, here, you are now the third virtual resident of Estonia. And now there are 100,000 of them. But Estonia was actually thinking, I'm going to start getting virtual residents, but eventually virtual citizens outside of my geographic border. He was the first person to think, we're not tribal anymore. We're going to evolve to something even better, where we're wide open and we're all a part of the same globe. And that is going to open up so many opportunities. I'm going to give you a fun example of, there's another technology that's coming from the data side. You know, we're getting data on everything. You know, what kinds of shoes you buy, what kind of lights people buy, all this data. And that data now, they do deep learning on it, which is like putting statistical models around that data. And then they do something called artificial intelligence, which is like an expert system on that data. It's like an expert puts their brain into that, and then that data can perform something new. Well, think about healthcare. Healthcare, am I getting the hook? Yes, sir. Okay. I'll go through healthcare and then we'll be good. I want everybody to be healthy. Okay. So in healthcare, we're going to have our own data. We're going to have, the medical records are going to go up into the cloud, and so are your blood test results and your genetic history. That's all going to be up in the cloud, and it's going to be calculated. Interesting things will be calculated. But in addition to those, your Fitbit results and what you ate for breakfast and who you've met and where you've traveled and what seat you were sitting in and what light you were exposed to and where there was a fire, all that data is going to be out there. So that, if done properly, that expert system will provide a better diagnosis if you come in and say to your doctor and say, I've got a headache or I've got a footache or whatever. That data will provide that doctor so much more information than that doctor would have had if he or she had just sort of asked you a few questions. And the proof here is that we have a company called Cloudmedix. And what Cloudmedix does is they do this expert system. And they ran a test, and they took the doctor test. This is the test when the doctor, just before they become a doctor, they have to take this test that's like, okay, you know, my eyes hurt, I have a big mole on my side of my throat, and I'm having trouble walking on the left-hand side. What do I have? Well, Cloudmedix, the average doctor gets about a 76. A passing grade's about a 70. Cloudmedix got an 86, and when combined with a doctor, got a 91. So we have a pretty good idea that we're not getting the best diagnosis when we see the doctor, and we can do a lot better. So think of the size of the industries I've just talked about. They are in the trillions of dollars. That's healthcare and insurance and banking and finance and government itself. This is really one of the most exciting times in the history of humanity. We're going through a transformation to a higher people, a higher level, and in doing so, we're going to run into a lot of turmoil and a lot of tumult, because there are going to be people who are going to resist this, but it's coming. And so you'll see governments either go, oh, this is a really dangerous thing, we shouldn't have anything to do with it, and then you'll see governments that say, wow, let's take advantage of this. And perfect example is that China said Bitcoin's illegal here because he was threatened by a new kind of currency that might be better than the renminbi. Clearly is better than renminbi. And then Japan said, let's make Bitcoin a national currency. And so all the entrepreneurs from China who are working on Bitcoin, blockchain, smart contracts, they all moved. And where do they go? They go to Japan, or they go someplace else where they feel more welcome. So you Argentinians having this huge crisis of confidence and of currency, and where it's very difficult to get investment here. You're in this amazing crisis. When there is a huge crisis like that, it is an amazing opportunity. You have one of the greatest opportunities in the history of the world. All you need to do is make sure that Bitcoin becomes your national currency, or at least alongside the peso, and then bring down better internet. My internet at the hotel was horrible. My internet at the restaurant was horrible. We need like 5G here now. So you get those two things to happen, Argentina is just going to rock it for the next 40 years. Thank you.